Most people are doing something genuinely impressive right now. They lace up their shoes every single day without fail. They hit 8,000 steps, sometimes 10, sometimes 12. They stay consistent for weeks, then months, then longer. That discipline deserves real credit, not dismissal or doubt. But then they catch their reflection in a mirror, and something frustrating stares back at them immediately. The belly fat looks exactly the same as before. So they reach for the most obvious explanation available. Walk faster, they think. Walk longer. Walk harder. They add hills. They increase pace. They push. They sweat more, breathe harder, feel more exhausted. And yet the mirror still shows the same story. The scale might shift slightly, a pound here or there, but the stomach stays stubborn, untouched, frustratingly unchanged. Here's a possibility most people never consider seriously. The problem was never effort or discipline or willpower. The problem might simply be timing, hidden in plain sight. Let me ask you something before we go further. If we paused time inside your fat cells right now, during your daily walk, would they look calm or locked? Because fat loss was never only about activity level. It has always been about access, not just movement. You can move your entire body for an hour and still never touch stored fat if conditions block it. Most people assume any walking automatically burns stored fat. Movement feels like it should use body fat instantly. After all, you are clearly expending real energy outward. But people who study metabolism closely see something different entirely. Walking at the wrong time may rely on circulating glucose, not stored fat, but sugar already floating in your blood. Your body is still working hard, calories still burning, but the fuel source is not what you assumed. Stay with this because the next part explains everything. Typical fitness advice focuses on distance, intensity, and calories burned, but the body does not select fuel based on effort. It chooses fuel based on hormonal permission, nothing else. In other words, your walk could be excellent exercise while still being completely ineffective at accessing stored fat. You are not failing, and you never were failing. Your body is simply following instructions you never noticed. Once you understand those instructions, the frustration finally makes sense. To understand this, we need to shift our focus away from fat itself toward the system controlling it. Fat cells store energy, yes, that part is obvious, but more important is the hormonal environment governing release. Two hormones matter most here, insulin and cortisol. Picture a warehouse holding extremely valuable, tightly guarded inventory. The workers inside represent your muscles, ready and willing. The stored boxes represent your body fat, waiting patiently. But the warehouse door stays locked most of the time. Insulin is that lock, controlling who enters and when. If workers move around outside, they remain technically active, but they cannot reach what sits locked inside storage. Walking is the movement of those eager, waiting workers. Hormones alone decide whether that heavy door finally opens. After eating, insulin rises quickly and predictably every time. This is helpful because insulin guides nutrients into cells. But while insulin stays elevated, fat cells hold tight. The body prefers using incoming food first, always first. So even walking after a snack changes almost nothing. Your body often relies on circulating glucose instead of fat. Cortisol adds another complicated layer to this entire system. When stress rises, cortisol signals the body toward quick energy. In that state, fat usage becomes noticeably less efficient overall, especially around the stubborn, sensitive abdominal area specifically. The body prioritizes readiness over releasing stored fuel reserves.
Here are a few honest numbers, not meant to scare you. Insulin rises significantly after eating and stays elevated for hours. The exact duration depends heavily on your meal frequency patterns. Research on low-intensity movement shows something genuinely interesting. Fat oxidation increases noticeably when insulin levels stay low. compared to identical activity performed shortly after a meal. This means walking alone does not decide your fuel source. Hormones decide, quietly, consistently, behind the scenes, every time. The body is not refusing to burn stored fat. It is following protective instructions built into its design. When insulin is high, food energy sits readily available, so releasing stored fuel becomes completely unnecessary at that moment. When insulin finally falls, stored fuel becomes accessible again. So the real question was never simply about walking. The real question is what hormonal state existed during that walk. Once you see this clearly, the wrong time makes sense. Now let's slow everything down and watch minute by minute. What actually happens inside your body once you start walking? During the first 2 minutes, something called ignition begins quietly. You stand up, your posture shifts, your nervous system activates. Heart rate rises gently, adrenaline appears faintly in circulation. This signal tells tissues that energy demand might be coming. Fat cells even receive an early message preparing for release. But another competing signal might already be present and stronger. If you recently ate or grazed throughout the day, insulin is still circulating, quietly overriding that fat release message. The body interprets the situation simply and logically every time. Food energy is available, so stored energy stays fully protected. Between minutes 3 and 10, something called the shift phase occurs. Your stride stabilizes, your breathing settles into a steady rhythm. At this exact point, your body chooses its primary fuel. This decision is not conscious and not based on effort. It is purely biochemical, happening far below your awareness. If insulin is high, muscles absorb glucose from your bloodstream. The walk still burns energy, but mostly from recent meals. Fat cells remain largely inactive, sitting quietly in the background. If insulin is low instead, fatty acids enter circulation quickly. Muscles begin using stored fuel almost immediately once released. Same walk, same pace, same distance, completely different internal story. Between 10 and 30 minutes, something called the training phase develops. This is where training genuinely starts to matter most. Your metabolism adapts to whatever pattern you repeat consistently. If most walks happen while insulin sits elevated regularly, your body becomes efficient specifically at using glucose for movement. It learns that activity usually coincides with incoming food. But if walks happen during naturally low insulin periods instead, the body practices accessing fat more and more efficiently. Transport systems for fatty acids become noticeably more active. Mitochondria become better at processing that stored energy source. Here's the insight most people completely miss entirely. You may be unknowingly training your body against using fat, not because walking fails, but because timing teaches different preferences. Your metabolism is not stubborn, broken, or working against you. It is adaptive, simply becoming skilled at whatever pattern repeats. Now let's go one layer deeper into this entire system. Because walking does not just burn fuel in the moment, it teaches your metabolism what fuel to prefer going forward. Walking trains something called metabolic flexibility over time, consistently. Metabolic flexibility is your ability to switch fuel sources easily, between using glucose when available and fat when needed. In a flexible system, glucose gets used efficiently when present.
When food is absent, stored fat becomes accessible without struggle. In an inflexible system, the body leans heavily on glucose and struggles noticeably to access stored energy when required. If you frequently snack, then walk shortly afterward repeatedly, your body rarely experiences a true low insulin window. Insulin stays elevated for much of your entire day. In that environment, walking actually reinforces glucose dependence further. You're repeatedly telling your body food and movement pair together. Over time, the body adapts exactly to that repeated message. It becomes excellent at using glucose during movement specifically, but far less practiced at ever accessing stored fat reserves. This is one reason consistent walkers see little abdominal change.
The fuel access pattern simply never shifts or challenges itself. Now here's the moment most people completely overlook. The worst possible time to walk for belly fat loss is during constant grazing, when insulin never truly drops low. If you snack every couple hours and walk right after, fat release windows stay minimal throughout your entire day. The body remains in storage mode for most waking hours. This does not mean walking after meals is unhealthy, though. It genuinely improves glucose regulation and post-meal blood sugar. But if every walk happens fed, with insulin never dropping, fat access stays limited no matter how consistent you are. The body needs contrast, genuine variation, not endless sameness. It needs periods where insulin drops while movement happens simultaneously. That specific combination trains real fat mobilization over time. Without that contrast, you might be doing everything right behaviorally, moving daily, staying active, showing genuine discipline every single day, yet never creating the hormonal environment belly fat actually requires. The walk itself was never the real problem here. The timing relative to eating determines the lesson your body learns. Once you understand that, frustration shifts into something more useful. Instead of asking why walking fails, ask a better question. When am I actually giving my body permission to release fat? When this pattern continues for weeks, then months, effects emerge clearly. People who walk regularly but always shortly after eating notice something. Their activity stays high, yet their weight barely shifts at all. Abdominal fat changes painfully slowly despite consistent daily effort. They feel hungrier than expected, especially between scheduled meals. They lean on frequent snacks just to maintain steady energy. People observing these patterns often see stable weight despite activity. Resting heart rate and cardiovascular fitness may genuinely improve, though, but fat distribution stays stubborn, resistant, frustratingly unchanged over time. The issue is never lack of effort or insufficient discipline. The issue is fuel access simply never shifting or changing, because the body repeatedly experiences walking in a fed state. It anticipates glucose use for movement almost every single time. When glucose eventually drops later, hunger signals arrive sooner instead. The body becomes dependent on incoming energy rather than storage. This creates a familiar cycle: eat, walk, use glucose, feel hungry, then eat again, restarting the entire cycle once more completely. Over time, metabolic flexibility quietly decreases without anyone noticing directly. The body still functions normally, but strongly prefers quick fuel. Belly fat persists simply because release rarely gets practiced enough. The abdominal area stays especially sensitive to these hormonal signals. Without low insulin activity periods, stored energy remains largely untouched. People studying this do not only measure body weight alone. They look at energy stability, recovery patterns, and hunger timing, specifically how long someone comfortably goes between scheduled meals.
When these markers show frequent hunger and constant intake, it often reflects reliance on circulating fuel over stored fuel. This does not mean walking itself is somehow ineffective or wasted. It means the body responds logically to whatever signals repeat. If activity always follows eating, the body expects food fuel. If activity sometimes occurs without incoming food, adaptation happens differently. So, over months, walk timing genuinely shapes metabolic behavior significantly. Consistent fed-state walking maintains health and circulation reasonably well, but it rarely challenges stored energy use in any meaningful way. Introducing occasional low-insulin movement changes the entire message received. The result is not dramatic overnight fat loss, be realistic here. The result is a gradual shift in how fuel gets chosen. When researchers compared activity timing instead of just activity amount, several results genuinely surprised even experienced people studying this closely. Surprise number one: more steps do not always equal more loss.
Two people can walk identical distances daily with completely different results, depending entirely on when that walking happens relative to meals. Surprise number 2, frequent eating can suppress fat use significantly, more than inactivity alone ever could on its own. If insulin stays elevated most of the day from grazing, the body rarely enters a state requiring stored fuel release. Even genuinely active people may primarily burn circulating glucose instead. Surprise number 3, slow walking during low insulin periods works better. It can outperform longer, faster walking done in a fed state. Pace does not need to be intense for fat access. The hormonal environment matters more than raw effort level entirely. Surprise number 4, timing consistency matters more than total step count. When the body repeatedly experiences movement during low insulin windows, it practices releasing fatty acids and becomes genuinely more efficient. The lesson here is subtle, but genuinely important to understand. Walking always benefits circulation, mood, and cardiovascular health regardless, but fat access specifically responds to hormonal context, not just action. The body interprets signals carefully, not simply raw movement alone. If movement always happens while food energy is abundant nearby, the body chooses convenience, using what is readily available first. If movement sometimes happens without immediate food energy present, the body adapts and learns to use stored energy instead. This explains why some people increase intensity without seeing results. They change effort levels, but never change the hormonal environment. The context stays identical even as the workout gets harder. Think about someone who eats breakfast, then walks 30 minutes. Insulin from that meal is still actively circulating during that walk. Now imagine that same person walking instead before breakfast arrives. Insulin has dropped overnight, sitting low and quiet for hours. The exact same 30 minutes now produces a very different result. Same shoes, same street, same effort, completely different internal chemistry. This is not a small technicality buried in academic research papers. It is the actual difference between years of frustration and real progress. Consider two coworkers who both walk during their lunch break daily. One eats lunch first, then walks immediately afterward every single day. The other walks first, then eats lunch once the walk finishes. Both log identical steps, identical distance, identical calories burned technically. Yet only one of them regularly creates a genuine low insulin window. Months later, their results on paper look strangely, stubbornly different. Not because one worked harder, but because one gave their body access. This is why comparing step counts alone rarely tells the full story. Two people can hit 10,000 steps and get opposite outcomes. The missing variable was never visible on a fitness tracker screen. It was happening quietly inside their bloodstream the entire time. None of this requires complicated tracking, expensive gadgets, or rigid rules. It simply requires occasionally noticing where your walk falls relative to meals. A walk before breakfast, a walk before dinner, a walk after fasting. These moments naturally align with lower insulin without any extreme measures. You do not need to abandon post-meal walks entirely either. Those walks still support digestion, blood sugar, and general well-being genuinely. The goal is simply adding contrast, not eliminating one pattern completely. A body that experiences both states learns flexibility instead of rigidity. That flexibility is ultimately what allows stubborn fat to finally respond. So the goal here is not extreme fasting or brutal workouts. The goal is simply creating occasional low insulin movement windows so your body remembers how to access its own stored fuel. Over time, that ability strengthens gradually and becomes more natural. Once you understand this, walking stops feeling like one uniform habit. It becomes a tool you place strategically throughout your day to genuinely influence how your body manages its own energy. Before finishing, one honest safety note deserves your full attention. This is not about extreme fasting or forcing painful exercise. Gentle timing adjustments are genuinely enough to create real change. If you feel dizzy, shaky, or unwell during any walk, your body is clearly asking for support, so listen carefully. Hydration, adequate nutrition across your day, and a comfortable pace matter. You should always be able to comfortably talk while walking. The goal here is metabolic guidance, never physical strain or suffering. Now, think back to the question we started with together. If we paused time inside your fat cells during a walk, would they look calm and open or quietly locked shut? For many people, those cells were never resisting genuine effort. They were simply waiting for permission that never actually arrived. Without a low insulin window, the body had no reason to release stored energy it was carefully protecting all along. Once timing changes, that internal signal changes right along with it. At the start, we assumed the issue was walking effectiveness. Now you can see it was always a relationship instead. Activity and hormones respond directly to each other constantly. Your body adapts precisely to whatever pattern you repeatedly ask of it. If you only walk when fuel is abundant nearby, the body learns to rely entirely on incoming energy sources. If you occasionally walk when fuel must come from storage, the body relearns access, slowly rebuilding a skill it forgot. So here is a genuine question worth sitting with honestly. What surprised you most reading through all of this today? When do you usually walk? Right after meals or randomly? Or at consistent times built carefully into your daily schedule? Think about your own routine and what pattern it actually creates. Someone else out there may realize they have been working hard while unknowingly sending their body a confusing, contradictory signal daily. Not from lack of discipline, not from lack of effort, but from a small detail that fitness advice rarely mentions clearly. Timing was never a minor footnote to your daily routine. It was quietly shaping every single walk you have ever taken. The good news is this requires no dramatic overhaul of your life, just a small, intentional shift in when you choose to move. Your body has been listening the entire time, waiting patiently. All it ever needed was the right moment to respond.